The California sun was beating down hard on the movie set, turning the air into a thick, heavy blanket that made it hard to breathe. It was one of those afternoons in Los Angeles where the heat seems to rise right off the pavement, blurring the horizon. Inside the roped-off area of the film lot, it was even hotter. Massive lights were set up everywhere, blasting artificial brightness onto the scene, making the crew sweat even more. The noise was constant. There was the hum of generators, the shouts of directors coordinating the next shot, and the heavy thud of equipment being moved across the wooden floors. Amidst all this chaos stood Keanu Reeves. He was dressed simply in a t-shirt and jeans, looking just like any other worker on the set, except for the fact that everyone recognized his face instantly. He wasn't sitting in a fancy chair with his name on it, and he wasn't hiding in his air-conditioned trailer. Instead, he was standing in the shade of a large scaffold, watching the crew work with a quiet intensity. To anyone watching him, it might have looked like he was just preparing for his next scene, maybe getting into character. But Keanu wasn't thinking about lines or camera angles. He was thinking about the people working in front of him. Keanu had always been different in Hollywood. While some actors treat the crew like invisible servants, Keanu made it a point to know them. He was the guy who helped carry heavy boxes, the guy who made sure everyone got lunch before he ate, and the guy who remembered the names of the people holding the microphones. He knew that without these workers, the grips, the electricians, the cameramen, there would be no movie. They were the engine that kept the machine running. But lately, things had changed. The production was running behind schedule, and the studio executives were getting nervous. To save money and speed things up, they had started making cuts. They slashed the budget for the food, so the meals were cold and bland. They cut down on breaks, meaning the crew was working longer and harder without a rest. The mood on the set had shifted. The energy that was usually full of excitement and creativity was now heavy with exhaustion and resentment. Keanu could feel it. He could see it in the way people walk slower, with their heads down, and he could hear it in the quiet grumbles that happened during the setup times. Earlier that morning, one of the producers had pulled Keanu aside. The producer was stressed, checking his watch every 2 minutes, and he told Keanu that he was worried the crew might walk out. "They're tired, Keanu," the producer had said. "Morale is at an all-time low. If we push them any harder, we might lose the whole team." This conversation stuck with Keanu. He looked out at the group of people working in the heat. He saw a young man wiping grease from his hands, looking frustrated. He saw an older woman rubbing her lower back, clearly in pain. He knew they were underpaid and overworked. He knew they had families at home waiting for them and bills to pay. But he needed to know something deeper. He needed to know if they were just here for the paycheck, or if they actually cared about the project and about the team. Keanu believed in loyalty. It was something he valued more than fame or money. He had been in the business long enough to know that when things get tough, most people run for the exit. But he also knew that true character is revealed when things go wrong. He wanted to find out who these people really were. Were they his colleagues, his partners in making this film, or were they just hired hands who would disappear the moment the money stopped flowing? The idea started to form in his mind slowly. At first, he pushed it away. It seemed too drastic, too risky. But the more he watched the tired faces of the crew, the more he felt he had to do it. He needed to test their hearts. He needed to create a situation where they had a choice to stay or go, a situation that would strip away the safety of their weekly paychecks and reveal their true colors. He decided he was going to pretend something was wrong. Not just a small problem, but a disaster. He was going to tell them that the movie was falling apart. Keanu took a deep breath and ran his hand through his hair. He felt a knot of nervousness in his stomach. He hated the idea of lying to people he respected. He knew that when he told them this fake news, it would cause panic. It would ruin their day, maybe even their week. But he convinced himself it was necessary to build the trust he needed. If they stood by him during the fake crisis, he would know he could trust them with anything. If they turned their backs on him, well, at least he would know the truth now rather than later. He stepped out from the shade. The sun hit his face, hot and bright. He signaled for the first assistant director to cut the noise. Slowly, the generators powered down, and the shouting stopped. A heavy silence fell over the set. The crew members stopped what they were doing and turned to look at him. They assumed he was going to give a pep talk or thank them for their hard work that morning. They had no idea that he was about to drop a bombshell on them. Keanu looked at their faces, scanning the crowd. He saw the sweat on their foreheads and the dust on their clothes. He saw the trust in their eyes. For a split second, he almost backed out. He almost smiled and told them to keep up the good work. But then he remembered his own code. He needed to know for sure. He cleared his throat. The sound was loud in the silence. He put on a mask of sadness and distress, letting his shoulders drop and his face darken. He was ready to act. He was ready to see if the family he thought he had was real, or if it was just an illusion made of paychecks and contracts. This was the moment the test would begin. The usually bustling movie set had fallen into a strange, heavy silence. It was the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like holding your breath underwater for too long. The hum of the generators had been turned down, and the shouting of instructions had completely stopped. Every worker, from the people carrying heavy lights to the assistants holding water bottles, stopped what they were doing and turned their attention to the center of the lot. They all looked at Keanu. He was standing there in the middle of the semicircle they had formed, looking down at his boots. The sun was still beating down mercilessly, making the air shimmer around them. People wiped sweat from their foreheads, waiting for him to speak. They assumed this was going to be a standard speech. Maybe a thank you for working so hard in the heat, or a lecture about safety. Some of them even expected him to announce a break for cold drinks. No one expected what was about to come out of his mouth. Keanu took a deep breath, steeling himself for the performance of a lifetime. This wasn't like acting in front of a camera where you could do a second take if you messed up. This had to be real. He looked up slowly, and his face was a mask of pure distress. He didn't look like the action hero the world knew, he looked like a man who had just lost everything. He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture of exhaustion and defeat, before letting them drop heavily to his sides. "I've just got off the phone," Keanu said, his voice low and shaky. "And I don't know how to tell you guys this. It's really bad." A murmur went through the crowd. People glanced at each other, confused looks passing between the workers. They saw the genuine pain in his eyes, and a ripple of worry began to spread. "The studio," Keanu continued, his voice cracking slightly. "They just pulled the financing. The main investors backed out an hour ago. They aren't sending any more money." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just quiet anymore, it was tense. A cold feeling seemed to wash over the group, despite the heat. These were people who worked in a volatile industry, but hearing that a production had suddenly died was terrifying. It meant they were out of a job. It meant the steady income they were counting on had just vanished in a second. But Keanu wasn't finished. He needed to make the test absolute. He needed to see if they would stay when the money was gone. The production is shutting down immediately, he said, looking from face to face, making eye contact with as many people as he could. We have to stop filming right now. Security is coming to lock the equipment. Then, he delivered the hardest part. He lowered his voice even more, forcing everyone to lean in to hear him. But the worst part is, because of how the paperwork was filed and the way the accounts are frozen, I can't pay you. He let those words hang in the air. He saw a few people's eyes go wide. He saw a cameraman drop his headset in shock. The money for the last 2 weeks, Keanu said, his voice filled with a regret that sounded heartbreakingly real, it's gone. The accounts are empty until the lawyers sort this out, which could take months. I am so sorry. I know you have families. I know you have rent. But there is no paycheck coming today. This was the moment of truth. Keanu watched them like a hawk. In the movie industry, money is the glue that holds everything together. Without it, there is usually no loyalty. He braced himself for the explosion. He expected anger. He expected people to scream at him, to throw their hard hats on the ground, or to storm off the lot in a rage. He knew these workers lived paycheck to paycheck. Hearing that they weren't going to be paid for 2 weeks of hard labor in the blistering sun was a devastating blow. For a long, agonizing minute, nobody moved. The wind picked up a little, blowing some dust across the set, but no one moved to brush it away. They were all processing the disaster. A young woman near the front, who operated one of the large cameras, looked like she was about to cry. The set designer, an older man with graying hair, put his hands on his hips and looked at the ground, shaking his head in disbelief. Keanu's heart pounded in his chest. He felt a terrible knot of guilt. He knew he was playing with their emotions, and it felt wrong. Every fiber of his being wanted to yell surprise and tell them it was a joke, but he held back. He had to see this through. He had to know who these people really were. Then, the mood began to shift. It wasn't the anger he expected. Instead of turning on him, the crew members started looking at each other with looks of concern, not for themselves, but for Keanu. The big guy who had been hauling cables all day stepped forward. He was a giant of a man, usually gruff and tired, but his face was soft with empathy. He looked at Keanu, ignoring the fact that he had just lost 2 weeks' worth of wages. Keanu, the big man said, his voice booming but gentle. Don't worry about the money right now. We can figure that out later. Are you okay? This must be killing you. Another worker, a woman holding a clipboard, chimed in. Is there anything we can do to help? Can we talk to the union? Maybe if we all band together, we can pressure the studio to release the funds. It was unbelievable. Keanu stared at them, barely able to keep his jaw from dropping. These people had just been told they weren't going to be paid. They had every right to be furious. They had every right to walk away and leave him there to deal with the mess. But instead of anger, they were offering support. They were worried about him. I just feel terrible, Keanu said, feeding into the drama to see how far they would go. We were so close to finishing this scene. And now it's all for nothing. I've let you all down. No, you haven't, someone shouted from the back of the group. We're a team. Then, the lead grip, the man who was essentially the boss of the physical crew, walked right up to Keanu. He put a hand on Keanu's shoulder. Listen, if the movie is dead, it's dead. But we aren't going to leave you here to clean up the mess alone. We can help you wrap the equipment. We can make sure everything is safe. We don't need a check to do that. Someone else suggested, maybe we can film the rest quickly if we work fast, maybe we can finish before the security guards get here. I know I'm tired, but I'm willing to stay if you are. Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. He had to fight hard to keep his face looking sad. He looked out at the sea of faces. He saw people who were exhausted, underpaid, and supposedly broke. But he didn't see a mob. He saw a family. They were willing to work for free. They were willing to help him save face and save the movie, even when they had been told there was no reward in it for them. I can't ask you to do that, Keanu said quietly. You guys need to go home and figure out your finances. We're not leaving, the lead grip said firmly. We started this job with you, and we're going to see it through, one way or another. The tension in the air was changing shape. It had gone from the shock of bad news to a rising tide of determination. The crew was closing ranks around him. It was a reaction that defied logic. In a world where everyone looks out for themselves, this group was looking out for the actor, the very person who had just delivered the worst news of their professional lives. Keanu stood there, stunned by the depth of their humanity, realizing that his plan to test them had revealed something far more beautiful than he ever expected. The words from the lead grip hung in the air, heavy and surprising. We aren't leaving. It was a simple sentence, but on a movie set where money is the only reason most people show up, it sounded like thunder. The crew members didn't cheer or clap. Instead, a quiet determination settled over the group. They looked at each other, nodding slowly, as if they had just made a silent pact that was stronger than any contract. Keanu stood there, trying to process what was happening. He had prepared himself for anger. He had expected people to yell at him, maybe even throw things. He thought they would demand he pay them out of his own pocket, which is something he would have done instantly if it were real. But this was something else entirely. These people were deciding to work for free, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The big guy who had spoken earlier, the one hauling cables, wiped his hands on his pants and stepped closer to Keanu. He didn't look like a movie star, he looked like a tired dad who just wanted to help. Listen, Keanu, he said, his voice rough but kind. I got rent to pay, same as everyone else. But I know you. You've been good to us. You treat us like humans, not like robots. If the studio messed us over, that's on them. I'm not going to walk away and leave you here to clean up this mess by yourself. That's not how we do things. Hearing this made Keanu's chest tighten. He had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep his composure. He was supposed to be acting, but the emotions welling up inside him were 100% real. He looked around the circle and saw the same sentiment reflected in everyone's eyes. They weren't looking at him as a boss who failed to pay them, they were looking at him as a friend who was in trouble. A woman who worked in the costume department stepped forward next. She was holding a basket of pins and fabric, her hands dusty from the set. I can stay late, she said softly. We have that one big scene left, right, the one in the rain. If we all focus, maybe we can get the main shot done before the sun goes down. It won't be perfect, but at least you'll have something. Yeah, the cameraman chimed in, picking up his heavy camera from the ground where he had dropped it in shock. I can run the camera. We don't need the fancy playback screens. We'll just shoot it old school. Let's just get it done. It was unbelievable. Just 10 minutes ago, these same people were complaining about the heat and the long hours. They were exhausted, grumpy, and counting down the seconds until they could go home. But the moment they thought their leader was in trouble, the exhaustion vanished. They were forgetting about their own problems, their own empty bank accounts, and their own aching backs. They were banding together to save the movie. The transformation of the set was physical to watch. The slumped shoulders straightened up. The gloomy, tense atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a buzz of energy that felt different than before. It wasn't the frantic energy of a rushed production, it was the steady, powerful energy of a team on a mission. Keanu looked at the first assistant director, the person usually in charge of the schedule. The director just shrugged and smiled. "Looks like we're back in business, boss," he said. "I'll go tell the lighting guys to reset the scene. We're gonna need all the power we can get." As the crew broke up and went back to their positions, Keanu felt a wave of dizziness. He watched them sprinting back to their stations. He saw people grabbing water bottles for each other. He saw two grips high-fiving each other, not because they were getting paid, but because they were proud of what they were doing. It was a level of loyalty that you rarely see in the world, let alone in Hollywood. He walked over to the craft services table, which was basically just a table with some water and a few stale donuts because of the budget cuts. He leaned against it for a moment, taking a deep breath. He felt terrible. He felt like the worst person in the world for lying to these kind, hard-working people. But at the same time, he was witnessing something magical. He was seeing the true heart of his crew. A young man, probably just an intern or a junior worker, came up to grab a bottle of water. He looked nervous but excited. He looked at Keanu and said, "Hey, don't worry, okay, we're gonna make this movie awesome. No matter what." Keanu looked at the kid. He couldn't help himself, he reached out and squeezed the kid's shoulder. "Thank you," Keanu said. And he meant it. He meant it more than he had meant anything in a long time. The scene began to reset. The giant lights were hoisted back into position. The cameras were balanced on tripods. The microphones were boomed overhead. Everyone was moving twice as fast as they had before lunch. They were shouting instructions to each other, laughing, and working with a spirit that money can't buy. They were doing it for the love of the craft, and they were doing it for Keanu. Keanu walked back to the center of the set. He put his cap back on and lowered the brim over his eyes so no one could see how misty they were getting. He thought about all the times he had read about famous people surrounded by yes men and fake friends. But here, in the dust and the heat, he was surrounded by real people. People who had nothing to gain by helping him, yet were giving him everything they had. He realized that his plan had worked, but not in the way he expected. He wanted to test their loyalty, and he had found it. But the test was now becoming a burden. He couldn't let them work all day thinking they wouldn't get paid. Every minute he let this lie continue was another minute he was taking advantage of their kindness. It felt cruel now. It felt like a betrayal. But he also knew he had to see it through just a little longer. He had to let them prove to themselves how good they were. He had to let them finish the setup. He had to let them experience the pride of doing the right thing when it was hard. The first assistant director clapped his hands loudly. "All right everyone, places. Quiet on the set. We're doing this for Keanu." The shout echoed across the lot. "For Keanu." Someone else whispered, and a few people nodded. Keanu stood on his mark. He looked into the camera lens. He knew that the most important scene he would ever film on this movie wasn't the one in the script. It was this moment right here. It was the realization that he wasn't the star of the show. The people sweating in the heat, working for free just to help him out, they were the real stars. He took a deep breath, ready to call action, but his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He knew he couldn't keep the charade up much longer. The guilt was eating him alive. He had to stop this. He had to tell them the truth. But for just a few more seconds, he wanted to stand in the warmth of their unbelievable generosity. He wanted to feel what it was like to be truly supported by people who asked for nothing in return. It was a feeling he knew he would remember for the rest of his life. The set was dead silent again, but this time it wasn't the heavy silence of bad news. It was the intense, focused silence of people who were about to do something difficult for a cause they believed in. The cameras were whirring softly, recording the empty space where Keanu was supposed to be standing. The lights were blindingly bright, cutting through the dust motes dancing in the air. The crew members held their positions, frozen like statues, waiting for the command to start the scene that they thought would be their last. Keanu stood on his mark, the piece of yellow tape stuck to the floor marking exactly where his feet should be. He looked through the lens of the camera, but his mind was racing. Usually, this was his favorite place in the world. He could forget who he was and become the character. But today, he felt like a fraud. He looked just past the camera and saw the faces of the people who had agreed to work for free. He saw the boom operator, a man with thick arms and a tired face, holding the long microphone pole above his head. His arms were trembling from the effort, but he didn't lower them. He was steady, professional, and completely selfless. Next to him, the script supervisor held her binder, ready to follow along with the dialogue, even though she knew she wouldn't be paid for this time. She had a look of fierce determination on her face, as if she was guarding a secret treasure. Keanu's heart began to pound against his ribs, harder and harder. It felt like a drum was beating inside his chest. The guilt was overwhelming. These people were giving him the most valuable thing they had, their time and their labor, because they thought he was in trouble. They were showing him a level of loyalty that most people never see in their entire lives. And here he was, lying to them. He thought about the single mother working in the wardrobe department. He thought about the young guy saving up for college. He thought about the older workers who needed every paycheck to buy medicine. By pretending the money was gone, he had caused them real fear. He had made them worry about how they would feed their families. Even though his intentions were good, he wanted to test their loyalty. He realized that the method was cruel. He couldn't let them actually work. He couldn't steal their time, even for a minute. It went against everything he believed in. The first assistant director raised the clapperboard high in the air. He looked at Keanu and nodded, signaling that the camera was rolling and the sound was recording. Scene 42, take 1, the director whispered. And, action. For a split second, the world held its breath. This was the moment where Keanu was supposed to deliver his lines. He was supposed to act out the emotional climax of the movie. The crew leaned in, ready to do their job, ready to catch the lightning on film. But Keanu didn't move. He stayed frozen on the tape mark. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and waved it in front of the camera lens. "Cut," he said. But he didn't say it like an actor giving up. He said it with a firm, loud voice that echoed across the lot. "Stop rolling. Turn the cameras off." The director frowned, confused. The camera operator lowered the camera. The crew members looked at each other, wondering what was wrong. Did Keanu forget his lines? Was the lighting bad? Keanu stepped off his mark. He walked right up to the camera, past the lens, and into the middle of the circle where the crew could see him clearly. He didn't look sad anymore. He looked intense, serious, and deeply moved. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a long, shaky breath. "I can't do it," Keanu said, looking at the ground. "I can't let you guys do this." The big grip stepped forward, looking concerned. "Keanu, it's okay. We said we're with you. Just give us the word and we'll get the shot." Keanu shook his head. "No. You don't understand. I can't shoot this scene. Not under these conditions." He paused, lifting his head to look at the crowd of exhausted faces. "Because I can't let you work for free when I have a check in my pocket with your names on it." A confused murmur rippled through the group. People looked at each other, trying to figure out what he meant. Keanu took a deep breath and decided to just say it. "I lied," he said simply. "The studio didn't pull the financing. The money didn't disappear. It's all there. You're going to get paid. Everyone is going to get paid in full." The reaction was slow at first. Everyone just stared at him. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy. They were processing his words, trying to switch gears from disaster mode back to reality. "I made it up," Keanu continued, his voice getting softer. "The producers told me that the crew was unhappy. They told me you guys were only here for the money and that you might walk out if things got tough. I didn't believe them. I wanted to prove them wrong. So I pretended something was wrong. I wanted to see what you would do if the money was gone." He looked around at the stunned faces. "I wanted to know who I was working with. And honestly, I expected people to leave. I expected people to yell. I wouldn't have blamed you if you did. But you didn't. You stayed. You offered to help me wrap up the equipment. You offered to work for free just to help me save the movie." Keanu's voice started to shake, and this time it wasn't an act. "I have never seen anything like that in my life. I have never worked with a group of people who care so much. You guys treated me like family when you thought you had nothing to gain. And I am so sorry for scaring you. I am sorry for the stress I caused you. It was a test, and you passed it with flying colors. You are the best crew in the world." As the reality of the situation sank in, the atmosphere on the set shifted instantly. The tension that had been hanging over them like a dark cloud evaporated. Shoulders dropped as the stress melted away. The worry lines on people's foreheads smoothed out. The big grip let out a loud, booming laugh. It was a sound of pure relief. "You had us there, Keanu. I thought I was going to have to sell my motorcycle." Someone else chimed in, a woman from the lighting department, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I've never been so happy to be wrong in my life. I thought I was going to have to explain to my landlord why I couldn't pay rent." Nervous giggles turned into full-blown laughter. The crew wasn't angry. They realized that Keanu didn't do this to be mean, he did it because he valued them. He did it because he wanted to know if they were a real team. In a strange way, the fact that he cared enough to test them made them feel more respected than if he had just ignored them and gone back to his trailer. They realized that he saw them as partners, not just background scenery. Keanu walked up to the grip and extended his hand. The grip engulfed it in his massive hand and shook it firmly. "We're good, boss," the grip said. "Just don't do that again. My heart can't take it." "I promise," Keanu said, smiling a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "No more fake crises." He turned back to the rest of the crew. "The money is safe. The movie is safe. But more importantly, the team is safe. I know who you guys are now. And I am never going to forget this." The feeling on the set was completely different now. It wasn't just a group of employees working for a paycheck anymore. It was a unified group. They had been through a fake crisis together and come out the other side stronger. They knew that their boss was a human being who cared about them, and he knew that his crew would stand by him no matter what. The trust was no longer something they hoped for, it was something they had proven. And as the laughter died down and people wiped the happy tears from their eyes, everyone knew that the rest of the movie was going to be special. They weren't just making a movie anymore, they were making history together. After the intense emotional roller coaster of the fake crisis, the rest of the day on set felt strangely light. The air didn't feel heavy with stress anymore, instead, it buzzed with a new kind of energy. The crew moved differently. There was a spring in their step, and the conversations were filled with laughter and relief. Knowing that the movie wasn't cancelled and that their paychecks were safe was the best news they could have received. They worked faster and better than they had all month, not because they were afraid of losing their jobs, but because they felt like they were part of something special. But while the crew went home that afternoon feeling happy and relieved, Keanu Reeves went home with a heavy heart full of thought. He sat in his living room, quiet and alone, replaying the events of the day in his mind. He felt incredibly humbled. He had tested them, yes, but they had passed that test in a way that shook him to his core. He knew he couldn't just say thank you and move on. He couldn't just pretend the whole thing never happened. He felt a deep need to show them, in a way that left no room for doubt, that their loyalty was reciprocated. He spent the evening making some calls. He didn't call his agent or the studio heads. He called a few people who could help him organize something big. He looked at his own finances, calculating what he could afford to give, not from a corporate account, but from his own pocket. He wanted this gift to be personal. A week later, it was the final day of shooting on the lot. Usually, the last day is a mix of happiness and sadness. Everyone is glad to be done with the long hours, but sad to say goodbye to the friends they made. When the crew arrived that morning, they expected the usual routine, a long final take, a short speech from the director, and maybe a slice of pizza or a plastic cup of cheap champagne before being sent on their way. But when they walked through the gates that morning, their jaws dropped. The usually gray and dusty lot had been transformed. Overnight, someone had set up a massive festival. There were long tables covered in crisp white tablecloths, set up under shady tents to protect everyone from the sun. The smell hit them first, the incredible, mouth-watering aroma of sizzling meats, fresh spices, and grilled vegetables. It wasn't just a craft service table with stale bagels. It was a full-blown gourmet feast. A famous taco truck was parked right in the middle of the set, steam rising from its grills. Next to it was a dessert bar that looked like it belonged in a five-star hotel, stacked high with cakes, pies, and every kind of sweet treat you could imagine. A barista station was set up in the corner, grinding fresh coffee beans. Soft music was playing from high-quality speakers. It looked like a high-end wedding reception, not a movie set wrap party. The crew members stood at the entrance, blinking in disbelief. They put their tool belts down and slowly walked toward the food, unsure if they were allowed to touch any of it. It felt too fancy for them. They were used to grabbing a quick sandwich between takes, not sitting down to a meal like this. Keanu walked out from behind the taco truck, wearing a big, warm smile and an apron. He didn't look like a movie star today, he looked like a host. "Hey everyone," he said, his voice carrying over the noise of the crew. "Come on in. Don't be shy. This is all for you." The ice broke. The crew realized this was real. They swarmed the food trucks, filling plates with tacos, fresh fruit, and salads. They sat on the chairs that had been set out, eating and laughing together. For a few hours, nobody talked about work. Nobody complained about the producers or the heat. They just enjoyed the moment. Keanu went from table to table, making sure everyone had enough to eat and drink. He cleared plates and refilled coffee cups, serving the people who usually served him. When the meal began to wind down and everyone was stuffed and happy, the mood shifted to the final goodbyes. The first assistant director stepped up to the microphone to thank everyone for their hard work. But before he could finish, Keanu asked for the mic. He stood in front of the crew, looking out at their relaxed, happy faces. He didn't have a script this time. He spoke from his heart. "This last week has been crazy," Keanu said. "I know I put you guys through a scare with my little test earlier. And I told you then that you were the best crew in the world. But words are easy. I wanted to do something to show you that I meant it." He gestured to the production manager, who was standing next to a large box. The manager began walking around the crowd, handing out thick, sealed envelopes to every single crew member, from the director of photography down to the interns who swept the floors. "Inside those envelopes is something a little extra," Keanu continued. "It's a bonus. Not from the studio. From me." The crew members tore open the envelopes. There was a collective gasp that rippled through the crowd, followed by a stunned silence. Inside wasn't just a simple thank you card. It was a check. And the amount on that check was equal to a full month's salary. For a moment, nobody moved. A young woman holding a check looked at it, then up at Keanu, and then back at the check again. Her eyes filled with tears. The older man who had rubbed his back earlier looked at his check, his hands trembling. He wiped his eyes with a rough handkerchief. This wasn't just a nice tip. For many of them, this was life-changing money. It could pay off a car, cover rent for months, or pay for a child's education. The silence broke as people realized what was happening. Shouts of joy and disbelief erupted. The big grip who had offered to work for free jumped up and gave Keanu a bear hug, lifting him off the ground. People were crying, hugging each other, and staring at the checks in total shock. They knew that Keanu was a generous guy, but this was something else. This was unheard of. A star giving away his own money to the crew, just because he appreciated them. Keanu laughed and hugged people back, clearly enjoying their happiness more than his own. "You guys earned it," he told them, over and over again. "You worked hard. You stayed loyal. You deserve every penny." Attached to each check was a handwritten note. In Keanu's messy handwriting, it read the same thing on every card: "To the best crew in the world. Thank you for everything. K." As the party began to wind down and people started packing up their equipment for the last time, the feeling on the set was permanent. They weren't just leaving a job, they were leaving with a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. They had learned that their boss was not just an actor, but a man who genuinely cared about their well-being. Keanu stood by the gate and waved goodbye to each person as they drove away. He watched the tail lights fade until the lot was empty again. He was tired, and he was a little lighter in the bank account, but he felt incredibly rich. He had set out to find out who these workers were, and he had ended up learning a lesson himself. He learned that kindness attracts kindness, and loyalty inspires loyalty. He pretended something was wrong, and what happened next was truly unbelievable. But the reward at the end proved that sometimes, the best stories aren't the ones you see on the movie screen. They are the ones that happen in real life, when a boss and his team become a family. It was a rap day nobody would ever forget.